I'd like to start off by making a somewhat controversial statement. Your store is no longer your store. Now, by that, I mean a metaphor, of course. As it turns out, and as many of you in online retailing will know for some time now, the competition is just a click away. Now, that used to impact primarily online. But now you're looking at no matter what channel people are shopping in, the competition is always there. And it starts with a device that looks very much like this. So what I'd like to do is first define what I mean by omnichannel, because the crux of it is that. Omnichannel. It means that wherever your customer is shopping, they're only that click away. They're actually, in many cases, shopping in more than one place at the same time. So let me take a little historical jaunt. Where it all started, right, when we started retailers, we would try to drive a segment of customers into our physical store. We'd say, this is great, we've identified that this kind of customer is the best purchaser of our product line. We would spend the marketing and ad dollars to try to bring them into our store. And then once they were in our store, they had made some commitment. We could rely on them to stay there long enough to have that dialogue and hopefully to close the sale. And the implication was that we could actually separate our channels. We could have different managers for each of those channels. And knowing that once we drove it into one of those channels, our best chance was close them right there at that moment. Then the internet came along. All of a sudden you had this information channel, this other thing going on, and people started to split their behavior. Now at first we kind of ignored this, but we had this sense that people were probably thinking about stuff online and potentially coming to our stores more informed. We had what I'll call cross-channel behavior. What omnichannel means is the absolute fusion. It means that now in the physical retail channel, or in your online store, or even in their car, they're shopping on their mobile device. Fusion means that even though they look like they're in your store, they're probably distracted. They're probably doing something else at someone else's store at the same time, or potentially checking information at the same time. And omnichannel is going to have a really big impact on the way that we see retailing in the future. So what I'd like to do is take the next 25 minutes to talk about that. And then first I'll start off with some evidence why we think omnichannel is here and here to stay, and some evidence that you can see in your world. And then separately, what's the impact of omnichannel? And then lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about what can we do about it? How can we take back control to succeed within the disruption that this causes? So taking those in order. First, let's talk about the evidence that omnichannel is here. I'll start with some graphs on online retail, because it all started there. So on the left-hand side, here in the gray, you'll see US online retail, or actually, I'm sorry, US overall retail sales. It's roughly $2 trillion in 2011. And this $2 trillion doesn't reflect all of US retail. What I've done is taken out things like gasoline purchases, which really probably will never go online. I say probably, one never knows. But for now, let's assume that they don't. So that's this $2 trillion. And it's growing at roughly 3% per year. So that's total retail. Now on the right-hand side, this faster growing blue thing, that's online retail. Roughly $200 billion, so you can imagine in 2011 that reflects something like 9% of overall retail activity in the United States. But growing at around 18% per year. So growing very, very fast and stealing share. Now, beyond that, one other interesting thing I'll note, that shaded region, that vertical column in the center that's shaded, which is pointed out here, that reflects the recession, which some would argue is still going on today, but those of us who are retailers have already seen retail pick back up. But that recession, you'll note, caused a dip in overall US retail, but it didn't in online. In fact, online stores have continued to grow in every single period, and they continue to steal gross merchandise value from the physical store presence. So if that's online retail as a percent in the US, is it just a US phenomenon? The answer is no. It is a highly global phenomenon. In fact, within Europe, within the European Union, you have about $200 billion of online sales, very much like the United States. And very much like the United States, as Forrester, one of our research houses, indicates, Europe online retail is growing at about 18% per year. And just like in the US, it's stealing that at the expense of other channels. So it's very much a European phenomenon. I took some actual headlines out of the news here, and you can see, talk of Europe outpacing the United States and the rate of growth really continuing well into the future, and then a whole bunch of charts and such. But it is big. Online retail is here to stay. So that's my first indicator that we're in an omni-channel world. But I think more exciting is what's happening with cross-channel behavior. So this really tells us the impact of online. So if you look at this chart, now this is that wedge we've been talking about. This blue thing on the bottom is online retail, roughly that 9%. Up at the top line, we have that $2 trillion in overall retail, growing at about 3% per year. Now obviously this fast-growing blue thing on the bottom is that 18% growth rate, but more interesting is this red wedge in the middle. That's web-influenced retail sales. And what I mean by that, that's the behavior that we talked about in omnichannel, where people research online before going into your store and doing something. If you take that together with online retail, back in 2009, you're talking about 54% of overall retail. It's growing so fast that in the online impacted industries, you're talking about 71% of overall retail being influenced in some way by online. Evidence of omnichannel. Now, one of the reasons for this, and we're very fond of this at Google, is some of the products that we're launching. And so, for instance, looking at something like local product search. Does everyone here know what local product search is? Who's used it? Show of hands. So not very many. So local product search, what it literally does is it actually encourages you as retailers to submit feeds to Google. And we take those feeds of your local in-store inventories and we mash them up with product search. So as people search on something, in this case, like a Garmin watch, they're not just getting the online results, not just getting a comparison shopping, they're literally getting in-store results saying that if you drive around in New York City, in this case it's a New York City example, on your phone, it will tell you, hey, well, here's the stores that you can go to that are local that have this product, and here's the price they have it at. So we're seeing now at Google that 20% of desktop searches now have some local component, some location component. It's a huge change in traffic. It's one of the fastest growing areas of our queries, and not surprisingly, a big piece of this is being driven by mobile. So now you can not only take that query on your desktop, but you can take it in this device as you're driving around and say, where's the best place for me to buy a Garmin watch? It's a huge change in end user behavior and in how much empowerment those consumers have now to cross over channels to create this omni-channel world. So that's the evidence. Omni-channel's here. What does it mean? At the top, we've been talking about information portability. Right? And someone from Google, of course, that is pretty much our mantra, to make information universally accessible and useful. And we see that happening in this market. But it has three really interesting impacts for retailers. The first is that your customer is probably more informed than you are. The second, and this gets back to my statement at the beginning, your store is no longer your store. And last, we're actually finding that social behavior is now as portable as information. The impact of these, if you take them collectively, is that you're losing control. You can no longer lock them into your channel. You can no longer guarantee that while you're talking to them, they aren't distracted. Right? So I'll take each of those in turn. First, that informed consumer. So people are increasingly searching on the web. That's no surprise. In fact, if you look at general web search traffic at Google, what you'll find is the categories of product, things like consumer electronics or baby products or home furnishings or clothing that are amenable to online search behavior are growing by leaps and bounds. So over the past few years, they're each growing about 200% in terms of query volume at google.com. Huge impact, huge difference. And this is just one example query. One can imagine I'm looking for a camera, and here perhaps it's a Nikon. So I just type in my query into Google, get back a list of results, a range of good information, things like videos and reviews, and here, actual expert sites. Does anyone here know dpreview.com? A couple of camera buffs out in the audience. Great. So DP Review, as you probably anticipated, I'm going to click through, and I'm going to see what is effectively a term paper, a 100-page thesis on my very decision. So I now, as a customer of your camera store, are going to show up having read this 100-page thing that goes through really technical stuff like barrel distortion and different spectrograph analysis of the camera's distortion levels on colors. I mean, 100 pages on this thing. There is no way that your in-store sales rep or that your online store can recreate this level of depth. It's one of the reasons that consumers have this information-seeking behavior, because they can find it out there. And increasingly, as retailers, we've got compressed margins, which means that, in fact, as the amount of information online is getting richer, the amount of information that our in-store clerk has is actually getting less rich, right? They're less well-trained. And that's without even going into consumer reviews. So on this same decision that I've now read this 100-page treatise, I can also immediately from Google's reviews area get 988 reviews that tell me how people just like me feel about this camera and feel about this decision. Again, this is just something you can't replicate in your in-store experience. It's something you can't control with consumer behavior. So this actually gives a very different level of education to consumers as they come to our stores. Now the second thing, getting back to the beginning, my controversial statement. Your store is no longer your store. Who here would like to shop at the store on the left-hand side? Right, we get a little picture, a couple of words about the camera. Doesn't tell us the specs, doesn't tell us very much. Then you look at the right-hand side. Right, we get detailed specs. We know what's in the box. We have some suggestions around accessories. We have ratings, all the reviews information right there. So what I mean by that is what online folks have always known, which is that the next store is just one click away. But we're talking an omni-channel world, right? I've made the assertion that now user behavior is fusing together these experiences. So if I look at, for instance, a physical retail store, one has to ask the question, here are these two people, they've got the same decision. How much information do you think is on that little tag? So they're looking at these televisions, how much information is that store experience providing them to make that decision? It's not going to be equivalent to what they can get online. Now, one could ask, what are these folks going to do about that? This is actually a chart of mobile queries, shopping queries coming to google.com from mobile devices. Now, most of you have already heard the news, right? That smartphones like this one outsold PCs, outsold actual desktops for the first time in the fourth quarter of 2010. Now, that was a year ago. In the meantime, what we're seeing is an explosion in mobile query volume. Questions coming from devices just like this about products. About a 30x increase at google.com for mobile devices. It's an enormous change in user behavior. And you can see actually the spikes coming up. These spikes here reflect the holiday shopping periods, so not surprisingly with product-related queries. Now some of these queries are just coming from folks who are sitting on their couch and probably don't want to take out their PC and boot it up, because these devices are getting pretty good. Or they're coming from folks driving around. But getting back to that consumer, those two folks that were in the store looking at that television and trying to decide what do they do. We're seeing a huge increase in queries coming from people in stores. How much? Roughly 50% of holiday shoppers in the last season used a device like this to look up online information while they were in the store. 50%. Now, if I take the 18 to 34 segment, so people who are 18 years old to 34 years old, that's the younger generation coming up, they're comfortable with these things. That number goes to 64%. Used a mobile device while shopping in a physical store. And you can bet in most cases they weren't actually shopping their mobile device for the same store. That's the impact of omnichannel. People are now fusing together those experiences. And we're actually seeing this get catalyzed by products like Google Goggles. Google Goggles is a product that lets me take a picture with this camera of something that I'm looking for in a store. So I could be in front of that television again, take a picture of it, and Google will actually automatically identify what I'm looking at and look it up and give me the search results. So it makes it a one-click process for me to immediately get information on my mobile device while I'm in your store. Incredibly powerful, and it catalyzes a lot of this behavior. And lastly, of course, social. So it started out, social was, I'm in a physical store, I'm with my friends, I bring them along. That's social. But now increasingly we're talking about social being portable too. We can take all that information from our product research, we can take that cross-channel and omni-channel impact from mobile, and we can fuse that together now with our friends. So at any moment I can get Google Plus on this phone, plus want a product that I'm looking at in a store using Google Goggles, and drive my friends to that store or to a different store. So omnichannel is here to stay. And omnichannel is having a big impact in terms of the equilibrium of information. right? We are increasingly at a disadvantage or loss of control to our end customer. We can't control what channel they show up in. We can't control which channel they're even shopping in when they're in one of those channels. And we certainly have a hard time encouraging them to shop only within our four walls or within our channels versus going to a competitor. So what can we do about it? Well, as my introduction suggested, I'm with a part of Google that focuses on tools for retailers just like you. So the enterprise division of Google, what we're all about is providing things like Google Commerce Search so that you can do something about bringing back that control or adapting to the new world that we're looking at. So what I'd like to do is take this next chunk and really talk through 4 categories of what we can do about this. The first is we can drive more people to our stores, right? We can control the ad channel that brings them in from where they are right now. Secondly, we can provide a more compelling user experience and better merchandising. I'll talk a little bit about what that means in an omni-channel world. Third, we can take control of mobile. This is absolutely crucial. Mobile is the catalyst that's driving omni-channel behavior. And then lastly, we can take all that together and take control of omni-channel fusion. We can actually encourage people to work with us across our channels rather than hopping back and forth and out of our store in order to get to a different channel. So let me drill into the first one. If we think about driving people to our stores, it used to be we would do a circular, we would do a print ad, but increasingly we have to consider all the different places where our users are active. Now they're the same users, right? So ideally we're looking at an ad provider or someone who can help us in multiple media at once, right? So they might come in from online search, natural search at Google, or from an ad, a search ad, but they could also come in from mobile. They could also come in for something very directed like product search. And it could be product search on mobile. Again, we want someone that can operate across those channels to find our customers when they're in that purchase path, when they're just starting out their online research, that we can drive them to our store. That's fairly obvious, but now the next question is, what do we do with them once we get them into our store? Well, let's imagine we're driving them to our online channel. Now, a lot of us think about that online merchandising much in the way that we used to think about physical store merchandising. Who here has a category tree at their store, a home page? It's almost like a test for people that have hands. Okay. Getting late in the day, I know. So we all have some form of a home page, and we generally create these category pages. You can imagine that those are somewhat like the physical store retailing problem, right? I lay out my store, I put the pants on one side, put ladies on one side, men's on the other, and then I try to drag people through a path in my store. That makes a great deal of sense in a physical retail location, right? Because people have to follow my guidance. My merchandisers can think about how to lay everything out, and it's going to stay where they leave it, right? The merchandise doesn't move on its own, and so people will navigate their path through my physical store. But now let's talk about the user-centric world. So in a user-centric world, online, people don't have to navigate my physical store. They don't have to navigate the category structure. They may not even care that I've taken the time to create a category structure. And increasingly, we're seeing that behavior. So actually, in a typical online store, somewhere between 50 to 75% of the traffic to our homepage is going to immediately go to the search box. So what does that mean for merchandising? Right? If we're spending all this time creating these category pages and obsessing over the different offers that we'll create there, we're actually immediately losing that value to this 75% of people. So what I want to talk about is what we can do about that. How do we merchandise in a user-centric world? And I think it starts with the online experience. It starts, in fact, with the search experience. Now, this is an example of Google Commerce Search, so some of the features that we bring along. And there are other options. But right at the top, you've got to know you've got to have the best possible relevance. As people search, they need to see what you have and expose that product catalog effectively. It, of course, needs to operate across all the languages that you do. And it can't be English as a second language or Dutch as a second language. It has to understand the unique diacritics and the unique stemming and all the other things that are specific to those languages. And of course, it has to get spell correction in all those languages. That's the table stakes. Getting fast response and relevance, that's just getting you into the game. Increasingly, people are expecting features like search as you type. And so here you're seeing, for instance, as I type, much like on google.com, I'll get a list of results, and it'll actually start to suggest ideas for me for my query. And of course, you need to have other things like dynamic navigation, those menus that allow me to refine my search, or things like range filters. But beyond the feature list, the question comes down to quality. In a world that's user-centric and where there's no barrier for someone to go to someone else's store, you don't just need to have the features checked off. You need to actually have the best version of them. So for instance, your search as you type, is it relevance ranked? How are those suggestions getting there? Right? And one of the advantages, or one of the nice things about Google Commerce Search, is that it draws on the billions and billions of queries that I was talking about at google.com to help identify what's the right relevance strategy and how do I order things in my product suggestions. It also benefits from really interesting innovations that only Google can provide. So here's an example of Google Product Search. And for those of you who don't know, we actually recently launched this ability to search by style and by color. And by that I mean if I did something like looking at a black dress with a low neckline. So here's a black dress that's low cut, low neckline. This may not have been tagged, right? We don't always have the wisdom to tag our merchandise in exactly the way that a customer will ask their questions. So there may not have been a low neckline tag or some other piece of metadata that categorized our products this way. But the nice thing is that now Google Product Search can identify this product at the top and take a look at how similar all these other products are now, which are automatically culled from the rest of Product Search. They're all black. They all have low necklines. That's done without any metadata. Right? So we're taking your data as it is. So this is one of those tremendous values you talk about in having the best user experience. You've got to keep up with Google. Right? You've got to actually be able to do things like this so that your customers can find your products. But as I said, it's more than just having the best user experience. I mentioned the word merchandising. So this is another Google Commerce Search customer, Panasonic. And what they're doing here is actually making their search results look like a category page, right? So if 75% of your customers are going to skip your homepage, are going to skip your category pages, what we can do is take advanced merchandising techniques and create a rich category-like experience even off of a search. And so you'll see here someone searched on audio, and we're bringing back not just a search results list, but literally this nice rich banner that says, go look at my HD TV and how that sounds with better audio. Great example of a merchandising kind of thing. And we're also taking that list of results and we're presenting it in a very different way, right? So it's a much more rich and engaging experience. If I hadn't said search results, many of you probably would have thought this was actually a category page. And that's exactly the point. We want to merchandise, even though we can't control where the user will go. And the key for that now is to be more dynamic, to be able to merchandise in their context. So we can let them have that control of choice, because we can't take that back. We can no longer force them down our paths, but we can still follow them along and give them a rich experience. So that's search merchandising. Another great example of this is recommendations. There's been some research on this, that people will pay somewhere between 20% and 100% more for a product that's highly rated. That's great, right? Because what we can do with this advanced merchandising now is take that generic search and surround it with highly rated products. We can promote the ones that, in fact, are both most likely to close and for which customers will pay double the price. That's awesome for retailing. And if we don't want to go with a merchandising spotlight, we can also take dynamic navigation and use that to really highlight best of the best, or this other thing that people might pay more for. Right, just some examples of how we can take merchandising to follow that user where they happen to go, because they now have that power. And of course, once we get them to an item, once we get them to that detail, we're hoping to continue to increase average order value. And so Google Recommendations is another product that relies on those billions of queries to really aggregate together the best possible recommendation based on what Google is seeing at product search. And the nice thing here, right, is that you somewhat automated now can say, well, customers who looked at this particular woodworking instrument purchased these other 5 things. And we've seen this can drive purchase increase or revenue increase for a site upwards of 25% and more. So upwards of 25% increases in revenue just for putting this on the site. It's all machine learning, so that makes it very easy to work with. So that's merchandising. Now the third thing, mobile. The temptation, like with online, is to look at mobile and say, I'm going to infer from the last thing that I did. So online, we had the category structure, much like the physical retailing structure, and then we started to learn that search was really important. Well, just like that, we could look at mobile and say, the best thing to do here is take an HTML5 version of my existing site, crush it down, and now I've got mobile, right, for the smaller scale of this device. But mobile is a totally different platform. It starts off with screen real estate, right? Imagine looking at a physical store. Imagine if this was your view, right? How much could you see if you had this sized slot in a store and all you could see was this, right? It's a very different user experience. And given that user experience, in the limited navigation options, we can't really display this rich UX, this homepage with all the category structures. It's actually also very error prone. People type in their searches and they have those soft keyboards and they tend to mistype, right? And then on top of that, we have almost no real estate to display results. So the crux, or what's happening with mobile, is that we need a totally different solution. And generally speaking, because of that limited real estate, it starts with search even more than in the online desktop world. And that search increasingly needs to be much more relevant because we're only going to get 3 results on a screen instead of 10. It needs to respond with mobile-specific spelling corrections. And we've seen this at Google.com because as small a slice as mobile is for most search providers, at Google.com it's already billions and billions and billions of queries. And we've seen all the wild and crazy ways that people misspell things while they're driving, right, or with these soft keyboards. And then lastly, you've got to actually be able to handle query suggestions. If you can't do good query suggestions, then people aren't going to be able to type in full queries. You need to be able to complete their answers for them. But it's not just about the search interface. When you look at a mobile world, people are also a little bit shy about putting in their transaction information. In many cases, they literally can't finger it in because a 16-digit credit card is a little bit much to ask. So products like Google Wallet allow you to take people who are subscribing to a central service where their wallet information is stored by Google, and even if it's the first time at your site, they can click on that Google Wallet button and immediately have all their purchase information entered for them. Very, very helpful at helping people close the transaction while they're on their mobile device. But not everyone's going to do that. Not everyone's going to be on their mobile device and intend to transact. In many cases, they're looking at mobile while they're driving around and saying, what's near me? How can I find out what product or where I can buy it? So in this case, we're looking at Vitamin Shop, another Google Commerce Search customer. And what we're doing is we're taking those local feeds I talked about earlier, that local product search, and we're combining it with the online feed. So now that a customer, if they want to, can click this Locate Me button. What it does is it gives access to the GPS in this phone and says, define a range near me. And then the interesting thing is it's going to search only within that range. So actually it'll bring back product that's specific to the stores that are walking distance or driving distance from me. And that's where there's this little thing in stock nearby. Now this is a very hard query. Many of you are already probably showing local inventory on an item basis. So I click on an item detail and I look and I say, is this in stock, this one item? This is a very different scale. So Vitamin Shop has tens of thousands of items. They also have hundreds and hundreds of stores. We're looking at the cross product, so tens of thousands of items times hundreds of stores, which gets you to billions of potential SKUs. And we're sorting and searching through all of that to refine down to a region or a range. So we can't look at just one item or one database pick. This is something that only works at the scale of Google. The second thing that I'll observe about this is it really drives in-store behavior, right? This actually gets to that point of channel fusion where, as I said earlier, what can we do about this? We can take control. You want people, if you have in-store inventory, to look into your mobile application and know that it's there and drive people to that in-store. The conversion rate for in-store, so online conversions, typically about 3%. If you can get them to your store, closer to 30%. But if I talk about channel fusion, there's a lot more going on here. Here we see a catalog. So this is something for Garçouche. And they might be selling in this catalog, but now they're starting to show things like QR codes so that you can immediately jump to a mobile application from the QR code and transact. Or, if you prefer, you can skip the catalog and distribute it electronically through Google's Google Catalog service. This is actually a service that people subscribe to. My wife actually uses this. And they get a compendium of all the catalogs they find interesting. And so Google helps you promote those and get them into people's hands. Works on an iPad, works on an Android device. And now as they flip through the catalog, they're immediately in a transactional environment. But let's get back to those 2 people in the store. Channel fusion also means that in the store, we want to encourage them, because we know they're going to look online, to use our application. So increasingly, we're going to see QR codes that will help people get that extra information that's not available at the point of sale online but ideally online at our mobile application. This is the crux of encouraging and owning the channel fusion rather than being victimized by it. And for those of you who are online-only retailers, you want this to drive your online app. So if you have the better mobile app, be in everyone's pockets that when they do get to this moment, they've got you nearby. And then lastly, in channel fusion, if you can't close them in your physical channel or in your online channel or wherever they may be, once they leave your store, getting back to the beginning of the story with driving traffic, there are things like retargeting ads that can actually identify them, identify they've left your store, and then position a new ad to bring them back. So in this case, they left this store for IHG, for hotels, and we can drive them right back with an ad later on that says, maybe you should reconsider, we'll give you a 20% discount. And increasingly, this channel fusion idea means that we're not just looking at this in one channel. We're not just saying if they left my website team can bring them back. We should know that if they went from the website to the store, if they went then left, maybe we want to drive them back to a website, or maybe we want to drive them back to the store. In fact, the nature of bringing all this together, these 4 points, is that everything should operate seamlessly. In order for you to keep those customers in your world, your mobile, your online, your catalog, you need to operate consistently across all of them. And that means, just take one example, product recommendations. Imagine I'm looking at your mobile site, and I've got something like product recommendations up, and it's about to say, well, you're looking at that television, perhaps you should get an HDMI cable, or perhaps you should get a television stand. What you want to make sure is that that recommendation on that mobile device knows what store you're in. Because you don't want to recommend an HDMI cable that's not in stock, or a television stand you don't even sell at that store. Right? You don't want to take them out of your store, but you do want to offer that recommendation. So the crux, right, of channel fusion is taking these all together. And one of the reasons I'm very excited to be at Google is I think we've got a very compelling portfolio that does just that and takes advantage of the scale that we operate in. So hopefully you found this interesting. Thanks for your time. Look forward to talking and hopefully getting a dialogue with each of you over time.